Welcome everyone to this talk, What's New in Spring? My name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, and today we're going to take a little journey through the Spring ecosystem. I want to talk to you about some of the projects that I'm really excited about, maybe to put them on your radar if you're not familiar with them. We'll take a look back at Spring Boot 3.x, Spring Framework 6.x, and talk about some of the features that have kind of transpired over those releases in case you aren't aware of some of them. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at the future in Spring Framework 7.x and Spring Boot 4. With that, I'm going to take me off screen so you don't have to look at me as we go through a few slides here. All right, so let's start with some Spring projects. If you want to get a list of all the projects in the Spring ecosystem, you can head over to spring.io/projects, but I just want to spend a few minutes covering a few of the ones that I'm really excited about. And that starts with Spring AI. So I'm sure you've been kind of inundated with AI over the last few months, last few years, but there is a new project in the Spring ecosystem called Spring AI, and it's a framework for AI engineering. Its goal is to apply to the AI domain Spring ecosystem design principles such as portability and modular design, and promote using POJOs as the building blocks of an application to an AI domain. As you can see down there, we have this kind of little graphic. At its core, Spring AI addresses the fundamental challenges of AI integration, connecting your enterprise data and your APIs to the AI models. So I'll talk quickly about a few things that Spring AI can do. One of the things it has is support for all of the AI model providers, such as Anthropic, OpenAI, Microsoft, Amazon, Google. And if you don't want to send all of your data out to the proprietary models, you can use something like Ollama and run open source models on whatever machine you're using, including your development machine. One of the things that I really love about Spring AI is it has a portable API support across all these AI providers, which means that we write code to an interface. So we are not writing specific code for Amazon or Google or OpenAI. We are writing code that then we configure the particular LLM provider underneath the hood. And if we wanted to swap those out later, we just change a couple of configuration settings and the existing code will just work. On top of that, we have both synchronous and asynchronous, which is the streaming API. So if you need to kind of stream back responses similar to how you might see on like a ChatGPT interface, you can do that within Spring AI. There's lots of built-in observability. So if you want to get access to what are the different calls going out in the system, how many tokens, which is basically how much they're costing. If you want to get some observability into that, we have some built in to the system. Support for all major vector databases. So when you want to take your documents, store them in a vector store, and use that later on, we have support for all of those. One of the things that does is it helps kind of point the LLM in the right direction. Another thing we have for that are tools or function calling. So depending on the provider that you're using, if they support tools, we can say, hey, we can get you access to real-time data or events or make calls to other APIs within our organization. And that's pretty easy to get set up with. And there's a whole lot more. I'd advise you to go check out the Spring AI documentation. There is a lot of really good, useful information there. Another thing you might have heard of is Model Context Protocol. Again, we have all of these different systems that we need to connect to and provide data to these large language models. MCP helps us do that. The protocol was started by Anthropic. It's not just for Anthropic. What's really exciting to me is that Anthropic adopted the official Java SDK, which was donated by the Spring team. This works with both Spring applications and plain old Java applications. And that, if you go to modelcontextprotocol.io, you will see the official Java SDK there, and that was developed by the Spring team. So really, really exciting there. Another project on my radar is Spring Modulus. This allows developers to build well-structured Spring Boot applications and guides developers in finding and working with application modules driven by the domain. So one of the great things about Spring Boot is you're kind of put into this project and you can really create whatever structure you like, right? That's great. Sometimes I like to be told where to put things. So sometimes I like to know that, like, hey, this is how we should kind of build things. And so if you've ever struggled with, should this be a monolithic application? Should this be a microservice? How about the best of both worlds? And that's really the Spring Modulith. And it helps us kind of organize our code and gives us some of the following features. So first we get logical module organization. So Spring Module uses Java package arrangements as the primary way to define application modules. This really provides a clear code-based way to visualize and separate different parts of your application, improving understanding and maintainability. We get some boundary verification. It can analyze your code base to verify that modules only interact with the explicitly defined public API and don't create undesirable dependencies in internal implementation details of other modules. You get some module interaction testing, event publication for inter-module communication. If one module needs to communicate with another one, it can do so through events. You get a really nice feature of being able to generate some documentation based on these modules and more. And so that's Spring Modulith. Again, just a really great project that I would suggest heading over to spring.io/projects, checking out Spring Modulith and going through some of the documentation. Last but not least, Spring for GraphQL. This allows you to build GraphQL APIs. And if you've never kind of had a chance to take a look at GraphQL, it solves some really, really interesting problems, like when you are trying to overfetch data. So I want to get some pieces of data for a particular screen, let's say like a mobile app. And I don't need all 40 of the pieces of data that come back from a certain endpoint. That's called overfetching. We don't need to do that. Let's just ask for the data that we need in this particular case. This also helps with the explosion of endpoints. So you start off building an API with well-intentions, but over time, teams come to you and say, hey, I need this endpoint to do this, or I want this endpoint in the shape of this. And that really kind of leads to this explosion of API endpoints. So there's a whole bunch of problems, really interesting problems that GraphQL and Spring for GraphQL solve. And this is really a joint collaboration between the Spring team and a project called GraphQL Java. So it has the following features. It has multiple transports, so you can use HTTP, WebSocket, RSocket. You get a consistent programming model if you're in the Spring world. So you can annotate a controller, and we can annotate a method and turn those into what in the GraphQL world is known as like a data fetcher. And it's really easy to kind of get started with that. You get this nice embedded graphical console, which allows you to experiment with these APIs. So if you're new to GraphQL, you're not sure how to write out these GraphQL queries, this console is a really great way to get up and running with that. If there's integration with Spring Security, there's observability features, which GraphQL really lends itself to, right? Because you may come into a API that then spawns or spans into different services. So it may talk to one service to get one thing. It may talk to a database or a cache or a local service and kind of bring those all together. And you want some observability in how that GraphQL nodes are kind of spanned out, right? So you get some nice observability there. You get federation support. Our friends at Netflix use Spring and GraphQL at scale. So you can have like one central API, and then, if you will, tons of different microservices that have their own GraphQL API. And federation is one way to kind of tackle that problem. And then testing is first-class citizen built into GraphQL. It allows you to kind of test your queries without using any transport, but you can also write specific tests to, say, test over HTTP. So those are some of the projects on my radar. If you don't know about any of those, I would suggest going to the documentation and checking those out. And if you have further questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. All right, next I want to just kind of recap some of the features that we saw in Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3.x. Again, this is the current line that we're in. We're currently in Spring Framework 6.2, Spring Boot 3.4.4. But I want to talk through some of these features in case some of them are not on your radar. Spring Boot 3.0, this was released in November of 2022, and this saw some big changes. First off, we baselined on JDK 17. A little bit controversial at the time when it was announced. Now it doesn't seem that silly, right? We get a new version of Java every 6 months. So we baselined on JDK 17. So if you're in the 3.x line, you need to be on at least JDK 17 or higher. We also saw the move to Jakarta EE 9 and 10. This is great. Now we have kind of the evolution of the APIs in the Jakarta world. Those were stagnant for a long time. Now we're starting to see some changes there, and we'll even see some changes as we get to Spring Boot 3.4 when Jakarta EE 11 comes around. So that's a little what they call foreshadowing as what might be coming in this presentation. One of the big themes in this line was ahead of time compilation. And this was a step that was a prerequisite for building GraalVM native images. So we take a look at your code, we compile it based on everything that we can kind of see. And now we can build this native executable that starts up faster, uses less memory, and has a whole lot of benefits to it. The observability story was rewritten from the ground up, starting in Spring Boot 3.x, and this continues to be a theme with almost every single release. You'll see observability improvements. This has just done a really awesome transformation, and there's so many really great features, not in just Spring Framework and Spring Boot, but across the entire ecosystem. HTTP interface clients allows us to be able to write an interface that says, hey, here's the contract for talking to an API. I don't want to necessarily write out the implementation details. I'll let Spring handle that for us. So go ahead and check that out if that sounds interesting to you. And then finally, RFC 7807 problem details just kind of gives us the ability to write some more information out in our errors when we're having problems in our APIs. There's a whole spec behind it. You can kind of read through that. Spring Boot 3.1 came out in May of 2023. I saw a couple of nice features here. Docker Compose. We introduced integration with Docker Compose. During development or testing, Spring Boot can now automatically detect and use services defined in a Docker Compose.yaml or a similar file. It could manage the lifecycle. So no longer did you have to start these services up on your machine and then start your Spring app. When you run your Spring app, it will see that file and then automatically start or stop those files depending on some configuration. So if you want to have a database startup, like a Postgres database, we can automatically start that up for you. This is really good for getting started with projects. Like if I wanted to onboard someone onto a new project, here's a project, download it. It will automatically spin up all the services needed, and you are off and running. We had some enhanced test containers integration, just offered more of a streamlined way to manage test containers, particularly at development time. Provided first-class support for managing services like databases, message queues, etc. Within a development workflow. So some great stuff there. And then easier configuration and auto configuration for Spring Authorization Server were added, making it much easier to get up and running with Auth Server. So that's Spring Boot 3.1. Spring Boot 3.2 came in November of 2023, added Java 21 support, which brought in virtual thread support. One of the biggest releases, I think, that I can remember. If you are using kind of high throughput web applications that talk to blocking I/O, like a database or an API or some file input output stream, this becomes very critical to being able to build more scalable applications. Kind of a alternative to reactive programming. Yeah, virtual threads in the JDK and in Spring came in 3.2. Really interesting to see. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, I would advise going through that. We got a couple of new clients in 3.2 that I'm really excited about. The REST client replaces kind of the REST template, and this is auto-configured for you. So you get an instance of this that you can just use in your application. And the problem with the REST template that I think a lot of people get a little bit confused on is they think it's deprecated. It's not really deprecated. It may at some point in the future, but in the documentation, it says that it's feature complete. It just means that it's not being worked on anymore. And because that API kind of exploded over time, adding all these overloaded methods to it, it might have got confusing when you're using the REST template. Which method do you choose for which type of interaction with an API, right? In this case, the REST client is much more simplified in my experience. It gives you a nice fluid API. And when you look at that code, you know exactly what's going on. There's no guessing, just a clean API that I really enjoy using. Similarly, the JDBC client gives us that. We used to use the JDBC template. There were some things going on in there that were a little bit confusing. You had to write a row mapper for things. And in the JDBC client, you get this nice fluent API. In certain situations where everything kind of aligns up, you don't need a row mapper. You can just pass in a type and say, hey, this is what I expect it to look like. And it's really, really nice to work with. And then we saw some SSL bundle reloading, which supports the automatic reloading of SSL bundles like keys and certificates when underlying files change, allowing updates without restarting the application. Spring Boot 3.3 came in May of 2024. CDS support. CDS is a JVM feature that can help reduce the startup time and memory footprint of Java applications. Spring Boot now has support for the easy creation of a CDS-friendly layout. Again, the observability story continues to evolve in the 3.x line. Service connections, support for things like Apache ActiveMQ, Artemis, and classic versions, support for LDAP, support for Bitnami container images, and more. Base64 resources. So resources can now be loaded as base64 encoded text values using the base64 prefix. This can be useful with resources such as SSL certificates and more. And finally, the SBOM endpoint exposes a software bill of materials for your project, and you can access it through the actuator. Cool. And that brings us up to our current version, which is Spring Boot 3.4, which was released in November of 2024. This has JDK23 support. It brought to us structured logging, which is a new way to kind of define how we're going to output our logs. There is support for fallback beans. If you're using something like mock MVC, there has a new way of using assert J with that. Expanding the virtual thread support in 2024. There's some new features there. And building images. So if you want to build, say, some type of OCI image, there's now out-of-the-box support for ARM64, which is great. Kind of looking to the future is Spring Boot 3.5, which will come out in May of 2025. There are some features in here that I pulled out. So being able to load properties from an environment variable. While this was already possible to load like a single property, it's now possible to load multiple properties from a single environment variable. So you could say, here's my configuration. You can pull in a whole bunch of properties through a single environment variable. You can now trigger quartz jobs from the actuator. So hit an endpoint, trigger a quartz job. That's really cool. From the SSL bundling, we have metrics. It now publishes metrics for those SSL bundles. And finally, Liquid Base has now been bumped to 4.3.1.0. Two properties were added for that. One for the analytics enabled, and then for a license key. If you are using their pro version, you can now put in the license key for that and take advantage of some of those pro features. So that's my kind of wrap up of where we've been in the 3.x line, the Spring Framework 6.x line. There are a whole bunch of more features. I would suggest checking out the release notes for each of those features. They do a really good job of talking about kind of what's new and noteworthy, what might have changed, what might have been deprecated. So if you really want to dive into kind of what's new in each of those versions, check out the release notes over on GitHub. All right, next up is Spring Framework 7 and Spring Boot 4. This is a new generation of Spring for 2026 and beyond. We start with the JDK 17 as the baseline. Now, I know I heard some rumors saying that people thought it was going to move to something like JDK 21, and that is not true. We are still baseline on JDK 17, but we'll have support for JDK 25, which is the latest LTS version. We'll upgrade to Jakarta EE11, so some new features there that we could take advantage of. Standard JSpecify nullability, which we'll talk about in a minute. Kotlin 2.x support, which brings in a whole bunch of features there. AOT on GraalVM and Layden. So Project Layden in the JDK space is looking to solve some of the same problems GraalVM does, but with kind of using a different approach. So AOT as the ahead of time compilation step for those will be in place. And then virtual threads on JDK 25. So I mentioned earlier, virtual threads came in JDK 21. Support for that came in Spring Boot 3.2. But we'll start to see some more features around this come into play. JDK 24 was just released, and there are some features in there that you could take advantage of today, but will certainly be there in JDK 25 as well, around the ability to not pin a virtual thread within synchronization. So if you had a synchronized method or synchronized block, before JDK 24, a virtual thread would get pinned, causing some scalability issues. That has been fixed. So if that is something that has been stopping you from moving to virtual threads, go ahead and check that out in JDK 24. So how about a timeline of releases? JDK 21 came out in September of 2023. We see a new version of the JDK every 6 months. So JDK 23 came out in September 2024, and then Spring Framework 6.2 came out in November of 2024. JDK 24 just came out in March of 2025. We see that JDK 25, the next LTS version, will be released in September of 2025. And then Spring Framework 7.0 will go GA in November with support for JDK 25. So I just want to talk about a few features kind of at a high level. We're not going to do a deep dive, but starting with JSpecify. So before JSpecify, Spring Framework used its own nullability annotations built on top of JSR 305. The annotations like nullable, non-null, non-null API, and non-null fields will now be deprecated in Spring Framework 7 in favor of JSpecify annotations. Why does this matter to developers? This is because these sets of annotations, specifications, and documentation are designed to ensure null safety of Java applications and libraries in the IDE or during compilation thanks to tools like Nullaway. Spring JSpecify annotations provide significant enhancements over the old Spring annotations, including properly defined specifications, a canonical dependency with no split packaging issues, better tooling, improved Kotlin integration, and more precise nullness specification capabilities. So this is a really exciting feature. This is a big feature coming in Spring Framework 7. If you're interested in that, you can check out the latest documentation to get caught up on that. Kotlin 2.x. We are embracing the latest generation of Kotlin. So we have deeper integration with Java nullability through that JSpecify, which I just went through. This eliminates null pointer exceptions at the language boundary. There's a cleaner API experience with consistent null safety between Spring and Kotlin, and no more of those defensive null checks when moving between languages. The new K2 compiler for all platforms is significantly faster compilation times for larger Spring applications, better IDE integration with more accurate code analysis and completion, and improved type inference with Spring's APIs. Faster and lighter reflection gives us reduced memory footprint in Spring applications with heavy dependency injection, lower startup time for Spring apps, more efficient serialization and deserialization of Kotlin data classes. So exciting to see us embracing the latest versions of Kotlin in the 2.x line. So bean registrars, new in Spring Framework 7.0, the bean registrar interface provides a clean, encapsulated approach to programmatic bean registration. Some key benefits of this are encapsulation, self-contained registration units that can be applied to any context. We get some flexibility, register beans dynamically based on some runtime conditions, type safety, AOT compatibility, and separations of concerns. So we see the example here. We are implementing the bean registrar. In the register method, we get the registry and we get access to the environment. So we are registering a bean of type email service based on the email service class. We are adding some constructor args here based on some environment properties. And then in our app config, we just import that registrar. We can define other beans in there, and now we have access to that email service bean. And when to use the bean registrar, a few things kind of jump out. When you need to register multiple beans programmatically, this is a great approach. When you have conditional bean registration based on environment properties, this is a great answer to that problem. When reaching the limits of the @bean declaration model, and when organizing related beans into logical registration units. All right, API versioning. We have first-class support for web endpoint versioning in MVC and Webflux. So the version source could be a request header, request param, a path variable. We get configurable API versioning strategy for the entire application. So you see here at the request mapping annotation, we have a path, and then we specify a version for that particular path. So previously, developers had to implement API versioning through custom code and annotations for each controller method, leading to inconsistent implementations across teams and projects. The new feature provides a standardized application-wide approach that reduces boilerplate code. Last but not least, a unified JMS client. This is a modern alternative to the JMS template or the JMS messaging template. This will work for jakarta.jms.message and for springframework.messaging.message. This gives you customizable operations in a Fluent style, unified exception translation to message exception, and unified message conversion capabilities. This is or should look pretty similar to what we've done with the JDBC client and the REST client. So those previously had templates. We moved to a more Fluent style, easier to use API, and that's what we're doing here with the JMS client. So that's a look at Spring Framework 7, Spring Boot 4.0. Let's kind of round this up with a little bit of a roadmap, where we are, where we're going. So Spring Framework 6.2 is GA. It's available now. This is going to be the final 6.x feature branch with long-term support. The foundation for Spring Boot 3.4 and 3.5, which is coming soon. Production ready on JDK 17 LTS and JDK 21 LTS. And you'll see a regular stream of 6.2 maintenance releases. This includes some deep core container revision. A lot of work has been done on the core container for things like faster auto wiring, fallback beans, background initialization. And if you want to get some really good information on that, Jürgen Haller did a presentation at Spring I/O in 2024. Go see if you can find that talk online. He went into a really good deep dive on some of the stuff and what was done in the core container around these features. You also get revised generic type matching algorithms for partial generics and more. So Spring Framework 7.0 GA will be released in November of 2025. A new generation for 2026 and beyond. This is going to be the foundation for Spring Boot 4.0, compatible with JDK 17, optimized for the new LTS version, which is JDK 25 coming out in September. We'll have features like JDK or Jakarta EE11, JSpecify, Kotlin 2.x, Project Layden, and more. Empowering modern application architectures with that programmatic registration of beans. This includes AOT support, API versioning for web endpoints, a unified JMS client, and more. Well, that will do it for me. Thank you for spending some of your day listening to me ramble. If you want to find out more about me, you can head over to danvega.dev. If you want to reach out to me, you can, danvega@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out and ask questions about anything we've covered today or anything in the Spring ecosystem. I would be happy to help. Thanks again. And as always, friends, happy coding.